Hanson Family Chiropractic. If you or your family is in need of care, half of our patients here are kids.
He was a trusted member of his community, a family man, a business owner, a respected medical professional, a chiropractor who specialized in working with kids. But now he's facing allegations that are shattering that image. His dad, husband, and doctor is accused of secretly recording patients dozens of times, many of them young girls. And that's not all authorities say this man was allegedly found with. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Hey guys, before we begin this episode of On the Case, I need to take a moment and talk about this app, Upside, that gets you cash back on daily essentials like gas and groceries. Upside is easy. It's also free to use. I use it a lot when I pump gas or go to a convenience store or fast food place like 7-Eleven or Taco Bell. Here's how it works, because we are talking about getting real cash back after you spend. Money will appear in your Upside account, then you transfer that straight to your bank. So here's what you do. Download the Upside app for free, buy whatever you plan to purchase. You pay as you normally would with a debit or credit card, then you file a claim in the app and you get money right back. So to find out how much you could save with Upside, click the link in the description or scan the QR code on our screen and use promo code OTC to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. If you've ever seen a chiropractor, you know that you have to give that doctor a lot of trust because they have a very hands-on job. And that's what makes what a beloved chiropractor outside of Chicago allegedly did so disturbing. This is Dr. David Hanson. He's a chiropractor in Batavia, Illinois, which is a really nice suburban community west of Chicago. This is actually a picture posted in 2019 by the Chamber of Commerce there, where they are celebrating Dr. David Hanson. Now, I'm blurring the people who are standing with him in this picture just based on the allegations that he is facing. But you can see here, plenty of people came out to celebrate the ribbon cutting for his chiropractic office. Now, the name of that business is Hanson Family Chiropractic. He owns it with his wife. The practice's social media pages are now deactivated, and also the business's website has been taken down. But we were able to grab some images before the website was taken down, and here are some of the things that we saw on it. It gives you an idea of how Dr. David Hanson presented himself to the community. Now, for example, you have the Hanson Family Chiropractic lifestyle, where, quote, Dr. Dave talks the talk and walks the walk by making healthy lifestyle choices by habit. This does not mean he's perfect, but it does mean he makes the effort every day to make good choices. Now, I'm going to talk about those alleged choices here in a moment. Allegedly recording patients secretly as they were getting undressed. And just wait until I get into the specifics of this case. It is really sickening if these allegations are true. But before we dive into that part, I just want you to understand how Hanson made this business a place that people believed they could trust. This is a picture of him treating a young boy who was fighting an illness. Here's a post that someone left years ago recommending Dr. Dave, saying that he specializes in prenatal and pediatric care. And this is video from that 2019 ribbon cutting at their new location, where the mayor talks about how important this chiropractic office is to the community. This is per the local public access channel on YouTube for Batavia, Illinois.
Hanson Family Chiropractic. If you or your family is in need of care, half of our patients here are kids, so we have a big emphasis on families. You can reach out to us at 630-230-6416 or our website, hansonfamilychiro.com. Thank you.
Great. Very sharp. Very sharp.
I'll just hear help.
So now that you know who Dr. David Hanson is on the outside, let's dive into what the authorities are alleging has really been going on at this office. Now, here's Hanson's mugshot. This was sent out by the Kane County, Illinois State's Attorney's Office in what was a bombshell release of information. Now, the state's attorney alleges that Hanson secretly videotaped more than 180 patients as they undressed or were unclothed in his office. Investigators say many of the recordings took place in a red light therapy room at his office. Hanson allegedly made the recordings using hidden cameras secretly placed throughout his office. Now, according to the state's attorney, most of the alleged victims are women, and they range in age from adults to kids. Now, ABC7 in Chicago is reporting that the youngest victims allegedly just 3 years old. Now, that's not the only legal issue that Dr. Dave is now apparently facing, because the state's attorney says that they also allegedly found Hanson to be possessing and disseminating multiple videos containing child sexual abuse material. Now, these videos are unrelated to the ones that he's accused of taking at the office. So it's in some ways a separate legal issue for him, but certainly paints a light when you look at the images that he's accused of recording on his own at his office. Hanson is now facing 5 counts of producing child pornography, 3 counts of disseminating child pornography, 6 counts of possessing child pornography, and 3 counts of unauthorized video recording of a minor through or under the clothes. Now, in its release, the state's attorney says that Hanson is being held without bond because the judge found, quote, Hanson to be a real and present threat to the community. You just think of that line and you think about the same man who once described on his own website as a loving father to 2 boys who, quote, loved working with his own 2 hands and uses a, quote, hands-on approach in another way to build people's health. The Kane County State's Attorney now has a call out to the community to see if anyone else may have been a victim, allegedly at the hands of Dr. Hanson. Joining us now from Illinois to talk about this case is Bryce Hensley, trial attorney. Thank you, sir, for being with us here on Law and Crime. This is a shocking case, especially when you break down just who this doctor is in the community in the western suburbs of Chicago. What stands out? Because I know you've worked cases like this for victims. Just what stands out to you about this one?
Well, thanks for having me on, Chris. I think the first thing that comes to mind as you look at this is just the sheer volume of potential videos. You have, from what we've seen in the police report so far, over 180 videos. That seems to suggest that there are over 180 victims. And from what we're seeing also, that involves, children as young as 3 years old that are on these videos. And so you kind of alluded to this in the opening, but this chiropractic facility, my understanding, was held out as a family chiropractic center. And that particular representation to the community, a suburban community here in Chicago, is particularly troubling given that was the representation. I'm sure patients went into that building assuming that it was a safe place for both themselves and their children and for the community at large. And so I think it's really hard to narrow down on one particular issue here that is shocking. They all are, but that in particular stands out to me.
And Dr. Hanson, he marketed this place, as we're saying, to kids and, was recommended by many to bring their kids for chiropractic care. These cameras were located, according to the authorities, in like an infrared sauna area where people were getting undressed. How do these cases typically work? And we don't know the specifics of how many cameras there were, according to police, or where they might have been located. But I do feel like we see some of these cases from time to time of people being recorded when they don't realize it. How is this typically done in a way where it's not just a security camera that any business would have, that it's something far more kind of darker than that?
Yeah, definitely more insidious. And I think what we're seeing is, across the board, these tend to be in smaller businesses. They tend to be owned by the individuals who are ultimately the perpetrators. We have seen them in situations like hospitals and healthcare settings and broader facilities, but I think more and more, just recently there was an incident here in the Chicagoland area involving an ice cream shop owner. And now you turn to this individual who owned a chiropractic facility. And you alluded to the fact that these cameras are not your typical standard industry security cameras, right? These are pen cameras. These are things that are designed to be very clandestine and able to be hidden within a small area, a bathroom or other area where people have a reasonable expectation of privacy. And so ordinarily what we see is there's usually a discovery by somebody who's attentive and alert and notices that something is off, right? Maybe a ceiling tile is slightly moved, or maybe they see a wire where there shouldn't be one, or they notice something facing their direction that shouldn't be, and it leads to questions, and ultimately there's a discovery. Law enforcement obviously gets involved almost immediately, And from there, there's two different avenues, obviously, right? There's the criminal angle where people are then prosecuted by the state or the federal government. And then there's also the civil angle where the victims of the recording can actually pursue monetary damages against the offending institution and perpetrator.
Before we get into the specific charges that Hanson is facing, when it comes to the expectation of privacy you have when you go to a business, if you're in a bathroom, there shouldn't be a security camera in the bathroom, right? And in this case, you see more of these infrared saunas. They're very trendy, showing up. Is that the type of location within, like when it comes to a doctor's office, like where can and can't a camera actually be?
Yeah, I mean, what you could expect is when you walk into any business, you walk in through the front door, if there's a cash register or something like that, certainly you should be expecting that a camera is there recording for security purposes. But when you get into a patient waiting room, when you get into maybe your individual tanning room at a tanning salon, or you get into one of these infrared sauna rooms, there is an expectation of privacy. And unless something is disclosed to you by the facility that there is going to be recording, you have that expectation of privacy. And so these people going into these saunas or these infrared rooms where they're getting treatment applied, there's no expectation in there that you're going to be recorded for any reason, let alone the perverse reasons that this individual clearly had.
Yeah, and it's shocking when you think of a victim as young as 3. That was one of the local TV stations in Chicago got that age, and law enforcement say it ranged in adults to kids. There's a separate situation, in some ways separate, that they found child sex abuse material, they say, that he was disseminating and he also possessed, according to the Kane County State's attorney. You look at the charges he's facing right now, and I just want to read these off. It's 5 counts of producing child pornography, 3 counts of disseminating child pornography, 6 counts of possessing child pornography, and then there's 3 counts of unauthorized video recording of a minor through/under the clothes. When people hear 180 videos of people, but then you only see 3 charges related to what seems like specifically the recording of someone when they weren't expecting it, what do you make of those being the charges that he's facing right now?
Yeah, so what you can see right now is I think the prosecutors have used their discretion to prosecute what they know they have in the bank. If you're observing these videos as law enforcement and you see that there is child pornographic material, you can bring those charges immediately. I mean, you don't really need too much more corroboration. My guess, and I don't know for certain, but my guess would be the other 150, 160, 170 videos that they have are of adults, and without knowing the identity of these adults, they're probably holding back on additional charges. So I wouldn't be surprised if additional charges come down the line against this chiropractor for the filming. I think right now law enforcement is just trying to work their way through the videos. I'm sure there's going to be some kind of informational session where they reach out to members of the community and say, if you think that you or a loved one may have been filmed, please reach out to us. They'll probably set up some kind of a tip line. But what you see right now with these charges, I mean, this individual clearly didn't exercise any type of discretion with respect to what he was filming. He probably just had the camera rolling nonstop, and in the course of that, picked up children on his camera. And what you can see here, and I think one of the most troubling parts about this, isn't just the possession of the child pornographic material, but it's the dissemination of it and the producing of it. That means that he's handing it off to some kind of third party. Now, we don't know who that may have been, but that charge specifically, the dissemination of child pornography, is a Class X felony, which in Illinois can carry with it anywhere from 6 to 30 years in prison. And there's no telling whether or not the prosecutors will seek those being consecutive sentences, which you can do the math. This guy could be in prison for a very long time.
Yeah, and what a fall from grace, to say the least. And I'm sure for the victims of this, people who have kind of realized, oh my gosh, I'm one of the people on this. Because you go to a chiropractor and a sauna, one of these wellness places, I just think of the amount of trust you give to a chiropractor, because it is, like, frankly, just a very hands-on kind of treatment that they give you. And then the other part of it, I'm sure for a victim, and I know you can speak to this from cases that you've worked on, where it's, I can't believe this happened to me, but then at the same time, the question of like, where is that video now? Like, how do you track exactly if, say you're in the ice cream shop and this video was taken, how do you know where it goes?
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, I think the first step for anybody who thinks they may have been a victim would be to reach out to law enforcement to do exactly that. Now, nowadays with the internet and the technology that's available, they are able to, in a lot of ways, track things down. There's no telling, though, whether or not it's out there in the hands of third parties, and people may never know. And I think that, on the criminal side, you can certainly pursue that angle. Most of what I do, most of what my firm does is on the civil side, where we actually represent individuals in cases like this, bringing claims for invasion of privacy, emotional distress, the anxiety that comes with what you just described, which I'm sure for anybody is that fear of, where are these videos of me? What do they show? Who has them? That type of anxiety is something that's compensable under the law. The question then becomes ultimately, who do you bring the lawsuit against? In this case, very likely the chiropractor and his practice as well.
And that's another part of this, because just from what we can tell from this business, that it was one that he owned with his wife, and it was a family chiropractic office. Don't know what she knew about any of this. I'm sure, it's very possible that she was caught off guard, and you just think of the trauma that she's going through, kind of coming to grips with what's being alleged against her husband. But at the same time, if she's the owner of that business, does that open her up to lawsuits from, potentially 180 people who were filmed, allegedly, if all of this is true, inside that office when they did not give permission for that to happen?
Yeah, I think we're going to have to wait to see what happens with the investigation for her specifically. What I've seen a lot of times in this case is it's actually the spouse that ends up reporting. Maybe they find the information and they feel like they have a duty to report it. Although I can say that in other cases, the spouse is complicit or even knows about it. And in that case, there could be liability. We start getting into things like corporate structure and whether somebody can sue somebody who's the owner of a business. But could there be criminal liability for somebody who aided and abetted something like this? Absolutely. Whether or not the wife in this case falls into that category, I think remains to be seen.
When it comes to the civil part of it, if someone is a victim and think of the anxiety that they have from this and they want to sue, how does that work with? There clearly he needs to be found. Would he need to be found guilty? What's the timeline work from the criminal part of this to the civil part of it?
The two processes certainly work in tandem. The criminal process can obviously take a significant amount of time, but the civil case can commence almost immediately once somebody realizes that they may have been filmed. There's discovery and things that we can utilize on the civil side, subpoenas, to access materials to make that determination. Usually civil lawyers are working in tandem with prosecutors, with law enforcement. If I'm representing a client, I'm going to reach out to law enforcement to say, hey, I represent Ms. Jones in this lawsuit. She thinks that she may have been filmed. What information, if any, do you have on her? Now, the distinction, obviously, between the two processes is obviously the standard that the prosecution has to meet. In a criminal case, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. In our case, on the civil side, it's by what's called a preponderance of the evidence, which is just more likely than not. And so the civil case is actually simpler. It's easier to meet that burden than it is on the criminal side, where you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. Here, I don't know if this individual really has much of a shot in either arena, just because of the severity of the charges that are levied against him and what seems to already be out there in terms of the evidence that's been discovered.
How do you, when you get to that civil part, quantify the damages that you would be going for? I don't know what the financial situation is of this family, and it was a very successful chiropractic office from what we could tell, but how do you quantify the amount of money that a victim could get if they sue this doctor as this investigation goes on, if it all is, the allegations end up being true?
So ultimately, a jury makes a decision as to the verdict in terms of the amount of money that the individual will be compensated for what they went through. The most obvious thing that people can think of is medical bills. Unfortunately, here in a situation like this, people likely aren't going to have astronomical medical bills from things like an ER visit or surgeries or anything like that. But I think everybody nowadays recognizes that things like psychotherapy, psychological exams, and things like that can carry a significant burden. But that's just one aspect. That's the tangible monetary amount that I think most people can look down at a bill and see, okay, it costs this much. The thing that I think is far more valuable here is the peace of mind. So when you go before a jury in a civil case, ultimately you can ask for things like damages for emotional distress, pain and suffering, and loss of normal life. What a jury ultimately compensates an individual for under those categories is really a determination that they make. As lawyers, we can suggest an amount of money that we think would compensate somebody for what they went through and what they'll continue to go through in the future. But there's no set dollar figure that anyone would necessarily be shooting for. You have to look at each individual case and see the circumstances of what that person's going through, what they're likely to go through going forward.
And just lastly, as I look at this story, and I kind of started with this, where it's kind of cliche in these situations to say it was the last person you would ever expect to do something like this, but he certainly on the outside didn't fit the profile of, if you were to say, what does a predator look like? And he's certainly accused of that, and we'll see if he's, what his defense is, his side of the story as the case plays out. Again, how do you make sense of these cases? Because, whether it's the one like you're working with the ice cream, and we've seen ice cream shop, and we've seen other cases like this, I guess, what is the typical profile of the people who do or are accused of these types of crimes?
I wish I had a great answer for you on this, but I don't. We've worked on cases here at our office that involve people like you mentioned, an ice cream shop owner. Obviously now we're dealing with a chiropractor. Our office actually just worked on a class action case out in Michigan that involved a medical doctor at a very reputable hospital. And whether it's in a situation like this with video cameras or you're talking about actual physical sexual assault, more and more what we are seeing are individuals that are in these positions of trust and authority that utilize that. They utilize that trust of their patients, of the individuals that are coming into their business, and they take advantage of it. And I think more and more people need to be vigilant about these things. It's certainly not the fault of anybody who's in any of these businesses that they were filmed, but I think there are steps that people can take nowadays, especially with more and more of these stories coming out, where people can be on guard, they can be on the lookout for things that may seem suspicious to them. If there's a ceiling tile that is loose, if there's some kind of furniture that's moved, if you see a wire of some kind that doesn't belong there, I think those are red flags that certainly warrant some investigation, maybe reporting it to law enforcement and making sure that situations like this stop as early as possible and the numbers maybe stop at 180 and don't extend into the thousands, which we've seen before. And so I think proactive steps that people can take should be made in businesses like this, and keeping a lookout, especially in situations where people are bringing their children into businesses like this.
Yeah, just what a disturbing story out of Illinois. Bryce Hensley, trial attorney. Thanks for breaking this down for us. Obviously, we'll keep an eye on it as it continues to develop.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris. Appreciate it.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law&Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.